Everyone. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the RadicalxChange Annual Conference. Our next session will be Open Banking and Payment Systems, Fintech and Blockchain, Models, Ideals, and Challenges to Come. I'll turn it over to you, Eduardo, for introductions of you and the panelists and begin our session.
Right, so hi everyone. I'm really glad to be here, excited by so amazing persons involved with this subject matter. So I would love to have your feedback afterwards, and we'll be totally free to discuss it later. But to start our panel, I would like to introduce our panelists, okay, starting from our women representative, Miss Nina Luisa Sidler. Nina is a partner at DWF, a technology-oriented global law firm, and she's head of the International Blockchain Competence Group. She focuses on the legal implication of blockchain distributed ledger technology projects and assists her clients with structuring of businesses cases with view to legal and regulatory compliance. Nina Sidler is active member of several associations and initiatives. I will just summarize the names. And she's member of the board of directors of Think Block Tank, IPDB, and Intabita. Cited, Nina is by Gianluca Lorenzon. Gianluca is Secretary for Economic Monitoring of Brazil. He is the responsible inside of the Ministry of the Economy to implement and to boost competition in as many as possible sectors of the national economy, being the financial sector one of them. We have also Dr. João Manuel Pinho de Mello, a director of the Brazilian Central Bank. He is responsible for the creation and the implementation of the Brazilian open banking and instantaneous payment system. João is the former Secretary of Economic Monitoring during the previous administration. João is also a professor of economics at INSPER. And myself, a professor of economic law, legal professional for 20 years, and chairman of the Brazilian Institute for Competition and Innovation, IBCI, an open and not-for-profit think tank created from the joint initiative of a group of professors and researchers that preaches values of free enterprise, free competition, innovation, level playing field for the construction of a fairer society with more social welfare and equality throughout open markets solutions. About our panel. Brazil is launching a new set of regulations to open and bring more competition to the financial industry. This ambitious agenda, however, is subject to be gradually implemented and, in principle, will depend upon the creation of a technological system and a set of operational rules, named as, quote, convention by the regulation, between the incumbents, who have no incentives, apparently, to truly collaborate to open the market for competition. The current banks, however, and upon such a regulation, will choose the technological tools, the bases, keys, and they are supposed to design the tech rules for the open and to determine the level of openness to such an ecosystem. So this panel is built up over these five or six questions that I will try to summarize and pass the word to our first speaker. The first is how to design an open platform and allow its implementation, mitigating expected barriers to be raised by the current incumbents. How similar agendas played out in other countries. How an open blockchain could be raised as an alternative to a failure in the self-regulated, quote, Plan A, to be presented by the current regulation or by the current incumbents in Brazil upon the regulation. Whether including more stakeholders into the elaboration of the convention would be desirable. Whether introducing compliance by design as requirement for incumbents and others to operate could also help. how can we make them accountable for the whole society, not only for their own interests? So this is the problem, and so ambitious like the project. And I pass the word now to our first speaker, Mr. João Manuel Pinho. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Eduardo. I'll be sharing my screen in 5 seconds. All right, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, as it's fit, or good evening. First of all, I'd really like to thank RadicalxChange for the invitation. It's an honor, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to talk about this very fundamental and strategic project that the Brazilian government is scaring, that is led by the central bank, but it's an initiative of the central bank and the National Monetary Council, which is composed of the central bank and the Ministry of the Economy. Eduardo has raised very interesting and relevant questions. Thanks, Eduardo. I hope I will tackle at least a couple, if not 3 of them, during the presentation. If I don't, please do ask me again, because they are truly important and strategic.
Okay.
So, open banking. Just to start off, open banking is inserted within the Brazilian Central Bank mission to promote a sound and efficient financial system. The role of the banking regulator here, which is in the case of Brazil, the banking regulator and the monetary authority are one and the same, is to support pro-competitive innovations, while of course ensuring prudential soundness and making sure that all data protection procedures are observed. Some people believe that there is a tension, a trade-off between these goals. We don't. We think they're complementary, not substitutes. We also perform supervisory, regulatory, and resolution roles here, which are important to set the context, the background for these initiatives. What I mean is that when we think about going through with open banking, we have to take into account, on the plus side, that we have a supervisory authority, and that means sanctioning. And it maybe goes to one of your questions, a little hastily, Eduardo, but one of the ways to make sure that everybody complies is to sanction of regulated entities. And we also, when we designed the Open Bank Initiative, we also have to take into account that we have regulatory powers to, in some case, impose through regulatory means compliance, and also resolution responsibilities, because whatever it is that happens afterwards, and obviously innovation and competition may produce and imply resolution actions, we have to take that into account. Resolution just meaning, said it more straightforward, is just when a bank or a regulatory entity fails. Obviously, we have to balance and trade off the benefits of competition with the safety of the system, although I firmly believe that the tension here is not a first order concern. Open banking will be implemented in 4 phases sequentially. Phase 1 will go live November this year. And this is a repository of publicly available data about participant institutions. That seems a little trivial, meaning this means that where are the bank branches, what are the average interest rates that they charge in different types of credit, what are the fees that they charge for different types of packages. This sounds trivial, but just sharing this information is in and of itself very pro-competitive and provides an initial level playing field for among incumbents and entrants. Stage 1, which will be launched in May 2021, is the main bulk of customer transactions and registry information. Registry means personal data, and customer transaction is exactly what it suggests. All financial transactions done by the individual. And here I have to pause and clarify and emphasize that the Open Banking Initiative is completely consent-based. The structuring building block of open banking in Brazil is property rights, and it's the understanding that was set in law in our version of the General Data Protection Directive, in our case, Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, has established the principle that data belongs to the individual. And open banking is built upon this principle of property right. And therefore, it is the individual's right and decision whether or not to share his or her financial data among, in this case, banks, payment institutions, credit unions, and other regulated entities by the Brazilian Central Bank. It is completely consent-based. Stage 3 is a payment initiation service. So this is our stage 3, which will be launched in August, is, just to put it in context, is the equivalent of the PSD2, Europe's PSD2. Stage 4 is the expansion of the scope of data to include, among others, foreign exchange transactions, investment, insurance, and pension plans. Open banking is mandatory for the largest incumbents, segments 1 and 2, and it's voluntary to all other authorized licensed institutions, but with reciprocity. That means that if you choose to participate in the Open Banking Initiative, you're a regulated entity and you choose to participate, you will also share your data, again, conditional consent by the individual. All participating institutions are responsible for reliability, integrity, availability, and security, and confidentiality of data. Institutions will be allowed to have partnerships with third parties, meaning non-regulated, to operate the open bank. It's mandatory to share data and services in a format that is convenient for public access in stage 1. And participating institutions must ensure free access to public information in stage 1. What we call the convention, quote unquote, the convention will define access parameters to prevent abuse. And let me pause here because this goes to the heart of Eduardo's question. The key thing here is governance. We built a self-regulated but assisted governance scheme, meaning that 6 different entities, associations will have equal political powers in the convention. That means 1 seat for the, let's say, the association that is normally, that it represents all banks, but it's normally, let's say, associated with the largest banks. 1 seat for the association that is normally associated with the middle-sized and smaller banks. 1 seat for the credit unions. 1 seat for payment, the association that is normally associated with the largest payment institutions. 1 seat for fintechs, and 1 seat for smaller, the association normally associated with entrant payment institutions. And last but certainly not least, and probably more important, what we mean by assisted is that the central bank does not have a seat but has veto power. And the central bank will arbitrate any conflict or unsurmountable conflict that comes out of the convention. Always having the goal of fostering competition, efficiency, and data security. Open banking here will help to get the most out of other strategies of the central bank. It's complementary to other strategies, such as increase the supply and quality of collateral, facilitate access to new initiatives, such as our fast payment initiative and sandbox, enhance the use of credit information, and interoperate digital services with payment infrastructure. I can go into more details later on the questions, but the core principle is property rights on data on the citizen side, customer empowerment, more competition, greater role for all players, level playing field, and making sure that competitive advantage here is not on the scale or capital or any informational advantage, but on the service, on the quality of the service and the price of the service that is provided. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, João. It was a very straight to the point presentation. And I said that already, but I would emphasize the fantastic role that Brazilian Central Bank is historically doing in opening this market in Brazil and trying to shift the competition from capital and mass to innovation and better serving the society. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yes, our pleasure. We have some questions. I will pass the word to our second speaker, and then I'm an optimistic person, so I believe we will be able to tackle all of them. Okay, so Jean, you have the word, please.
Thank you so much, everyone. First of all, good morning to everyone here, the speakers, and to everyone watching across the world. It's an honor, it's a pleasure, actually, and also to be here in this conference. And this invitation, I mean, it means a lot to be with such qualified speakers here on a Saturday morning. I mean, we really want to engage in this kind of discussions. It's important for us. It's important to have cross-sector exchange of ideas, especially if we can get global visions and perspectives. So it's really a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Gaban. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of context here of what are our challenges inside the ministry, because we are really concerned about any policies that impact the direct access to the credit market and to the general institutions and products of banks, especially in the context of the pandemic. I mean, everything has changed and the game is different now, but it's still very, very important for us to monitor and to follow on those policies that were planned before the pandemic, although our team has been mostly focused on those very specific measures. So Brazil has a very concentrated market when it comes to its banking sector. This should not be a surprise, I guess, for anyone. We do have a culture of traditional big banks that have dominated the sector, and this reflects directly in the consumer results of what is offered, especially in our spread fee that it's one of the largest in the world. So we do have a concern of how to challenge that. And this reflects directly in our competitiveness and, of course, in our capacity to get investment for those small and to those starting a business, because this is the main point in which they could rely, as they do in other countries, on their banking system. So it's a challenge, and it has been a challenge to deal with this concentrated market during the pandemic. The ministry, in partnership with the central bank, has established a committee during the pandemic to better assist and to monitor what we call the critical sectors, which have been around different stakeholders, but they concern majorly those sectors that more desperately needed credit and access to financial help and assistance during this time, mostly for paying their own for keeping on their financial obligations and duties on time. So we did have established that committee, and that just showed us the most important, I guess, the even more relevant and important discussion of this topic, especially for small businesses and to those private consumers and people, because there's a real difficult and it's a challenge to get credit to those people. It's been like 2 or 3 months in which have been designing different products and regulations, and the ministry has get direct involvement on it. We have launched a series of lines of financial products, some supported in partnership with another bank, some directly for our development bank. And this all just highlights the importance of initiatives such as the open banking and the sandbox, regulatory sandbox that I guess has direct relations to development of new fintechs. So all of this, of course, talks with the asymmetry of informations. So about the initiatives on themselves, right? Talking about open banking, what can I say about open banking that João has already not said? I mean, it's a fantastic job. We are truly admirers of the work of João and his team, not only because he was previously in the secretary that I'm currently on, very recently actually, that since I've been here, but also because it's unprecedented to promote this level of cooperation between different private banks and for exchange of informations and for exchange and for openness to competition. I mean, this is truly unprecedented, and this is mostly a result of the hard work of the guys from the central bank. The ministry in itself sees as an urgent matter. It's very important for us that the pandemic not to be used as an excuse for it to be postponed. I think we have a very good timeline of implementation. We are looking forward to monitor and to assist in anything that can be useful. There are some challenges, of course. I mean, the execution, the operation, as they always say, the devil lies in the details. And I think it's going to be very important to understand the particular behavior of the players, to understand exactly how the system's going to be designed, but we have full trust in the central bank. Anyway, it's important for us to understand which kind of practice. Just to give an example, in Brazil, sometimes we have such a complex regulatory system that most of the times are anti-competition conducts that we can be seeing, they're resulting in different kinds of concentrations in general markets. I'm not talking about any specific sector. I'm not talking specific about the financial sector or the banking sector in itself. Usually they are able to do it so through capture regulation. And that's because we have such a complex regulatory system, or even of interpretation of regulations. They usually, one company can kind of direct its relationship with another. There's several cases that are ongoing investigation inside my department. And I guess this is kind of a practice that we have in Brazil more than a direct anti-competition conduct by companies. So what's important for us here to understand how the players are going to interpret the regulation, how they're going to follow the regulation, how they're going to develop their actions and integrate within the main system. The digital system, of course, is very important for us and the design aspect of that, but it truly relies on the openness and transparency of the players. We have full confidence that the central banks can ensure this by their many instruments of regulation, and including, if necessary, let's say hard acts to enforce those regulations. About the fintech sector, I mean, it's extraordinary also the advances that the central bank has done. I truly believe that the regulatory sandbox is a worldwide practice that has been so successful in some places around the world, and it was due time to come to Brazil. I would highlight that this is not something only for the central bank. We have another, especially on the private insurance market and the private pensions market, ideas for regulatory sandboxes, and our department is fully committed to expand those ideas of regulatory sandboxes to other parts of the government, especially non-related to financial markets. This is such a great way to promote competition, especially in markets that have players that are well established. And this is something truly concerning for us as an urgent matter. Blockchain technology is also very important. I surprised everyone when I say a couple of weeks ago that our Brazilian, the equivalent of the Brazilian IRS, our revenue collector, is pretty interested in the technology. I mean, everyone inside the government is, and its possibilities are wonderful. We have to see how the system plays out before we do that. Of course, we also look very kindly to the additional market stakeholders, although we always have a great relationship with the central bank. And finally, the final challenge, I guess, is cross-sector data protection. I mean, we have been entering, and it's not just a change in our regulatory systems, and here talk more broadly about the data law in Brazil, but it's also a change of culture. It's a change of how we perceive the ownership of data and how players are going to behave towards it. It implies a lot of costs to companies, so there has even been some challenges and some attempts to postpone the full enforcement of the data protection law that João mentioned. We are still waiting regulation from the authority that hasn't been established. We're waiting for that in the next weeks. Hopefully it will be established before the first part of the laws come into effect, because we have to change that. I mean, we have to understand what it means for the consumer to be the owner of those data, and of its own data. And this is so important because it will reflect across different kind of products and different kind of markets. Overall, again, I think this is such an amazing action by the central bank. We fully support it, and we are excited to see the first results and to understand how the players are going to implement it. We have those concerns about their conduct and the digital system behind it, but we'll have to see it how to play out, at least in the short term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. And honey, you were very into our time, actually. Nina has questions, others too, but I will pass the word to Nina, and then she can present and make her question and interact with us. Thank you very much, Nina.
Oh, thank you. I will share my screen in a second. Yeah, I guess I represent the blockchain angle in this panel, and we'll try to bring in the research undertaken in that context with regards to governance of network structures. And I'm just thinking, just a second. I don't see the right screen.
If you need my help, you let me know, please.
Yeah, just a second. I just need to jump between two screens here. That's what I wanted to show. All right. So just very brief. I just picked this up right now. We in the blockchain space, it's all about how do networks organize themselves, and there is a part that is done on chain, and that part is like shown in this slide, where we distinguish between the access side, right? If a network can be accessed by the public or only by private, and what you seem to build with the open banking system surely will be on the private side here. And then the question, who runs actually the network? That's the validation question. And there we distinguish between permissioned and permissionless. And you know, on the blockchain side, typically the famous Bitcoin, Ethereum networks, they are all permissionless. But if we are talking about industry networks, specifically also with confidential data, like in the banking area, you will typically find permissioned ones, right? So we are playing on the right-hand side and presumably on the right-hand lower side, what we call consortium blockchains or alike. So yeah, you could make use of that for your purposes, and then you need to think about, and that's what I would be very interested in learning, Joa. How did you organize that body where you just talked about having 7 representatives of the industries, and how do these representatives actually get into their roles and functions? And that is a part of the like off-chain governance, which we also see in the blockchain context, and where we typically distinguish between 3 basic models. The first one, which had been explored famously by the Ethereum Foundation, is the foundation model. Foundation is a type of institution or entity which is an orphan. It hasn't got any members or shareholders, right? So it's put on autopilot when it's created, and then it's administered by its executives. That actually, at least from my point of view, had not been proven a good concept, because specifically if we are talking in the high-tech area, things change too much. So this autopilot concept within a foundation didn't play out well. So the newer consortia are rather using either associations which have members, which can change and which can also change the direction of the association, or if they are playing more in the for-profit field, then they are using co-ops for that purpose. So I would be very much interested in learning how you actually design that body that you created for your open banking platform. And I'm sure that there are tons of initiatives in the blockchain space where you could get, you know, further ideas for the governance for, because, you know, the blockchain governance topic is all about coordinating networks of many participants. And in that context, I would like, if you permit, briefly introduce a global association. I hope you see the blue screen now. Yeah, all right. Which is called INATBA, and Eduardo, you already mentioned, I'm at the board of directors within that association, which had been initiated by the European Commission end of 2018, and then finally had been formed in 2019, with, you know, a great variety of players in the blockchain space, from large industry to very small startups, micro entities, and including obviously all sorts of associations and foundations out there in the blockchain space. So the European Commission really envisaged that the need for the blockchain industry to get together and to discuss specifically also governance questions. So I don't want to waste too much time here. I'm sure that RadicalxChange will be happy to share the presentation that we sent over to them. But what I think is very important, and that's the invite to the Brazilian community here. INATBA is organized in a three-set way. We have the membership, which is the industry. We currently have nearly about 200 members. And then we accomplish that with a governmental advisory body, which is a part that the European Commission put actually into our Articles of Association, and the academic advisory body. So the INATBA organization is basically all around creating communication channels between these three sectors: governments, academics, and private sector. And that's a rough overview. We are still very Europe-centric here, but we really aim to get more members, specifically also from the Americas, into INATBA. Just a couple of member names, and maybe that's of interest specifically to you two, Joa and Gianluca. We really invite you, if you want to get closer to the discussions taking place in the DLT and blockchain space, to join our governmental advisory body and get into exchange within the several governmental representatives. And here's the list. So we started with the international ones, United Nations groups, the World Bank, World Trade Organization, and now are including more and more also national representatives of governments, typically ministries of economics or finance, and also central banks into this round. And then we have the academic advisory body, and that's just an overview. It's larger currently than the governmental advisory body. And we now start, we have 14 working groups, and one of which is also the governance working group. So that was an open invitation to all of you to join us in this effort to bring it all together. And I would very much look forward to actually having a couple of minutes left to learn more how you built the governance for the open banking in Brazil. Many thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Nina. And it was a very good presentation. Well, I'm really glad I feel myself included in such an invitation, although I'm not an authority, you know, maybe on the academic side of it.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. We'll stay in touch with regard to that.
Of course, and I'm really glad also that we have this opportunity to join such important persons like João and Jean to hear these ideas, and from an expert like you, that you do see blockchain as an alternative for what we are thinking of opening the market here for competition in a responsible manner. João made it very well. We should be responsible because we are dealing with like the lives of dozens of persons. So it's very important. But we have, you all can see the questions from the audience, I presume, right? No, you can't, Jean.
I can see the questions on Word document, right?
Yes.
On Google
Yes.
Doc.
Yes. We have like 12 minutes. I'm not sure if João seems to be the main target of the audience. I'm not sure if João will have enough time to answer all questions, but you can choose one or two, João, and then we can hear a little more Gianluca and Nina as well. I'm enjoying very much the panel. So João, please feel free, choose one or two and then you can tackle them.
All right, great, thanks. I'll try and, Nina, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. I can see that your contact information was at the very last slide. So I'll email you, it'll be a pleasure. First on Nina's question. What we call the convention is a somewhat of an abstract entity, which is a high-level committee with equal political rights on this 7 associations. There is a structure of or more down-to-earth technical committees that will decide on the technicalities, which are pretty important. Let's say the technology, but also on the principles of the journey of consent, and on recuperating costs above and beyond what we have already set in regulation that will be free of charge. So especially the journey of consent and the plumbing of how to expose the AIPs is it's pretty important here. Obviously, there might be some, let's say, conflicting interests within the convention, and it's our job to arbitrate them, having in mind as the ultimate goal, which is to foster competition, innovation, and the ultimate goal is actually to deliver value for consumers of banking services, evidently in a safe way, because we are dealing with personal data that can be sensitive. I think we have to face it straight through. I probably won't have time for all the questions. They're great questions here. Let me just let me address a couple of them. It is an opt-in system, and that means concretely that consumers will have to give consent at a certain frequency. This will be determined by the convention. Whether a certain frequency is at every single transaction or daily, what I can tell you straight away is that it's not an open-ended consent, which you give consent once and then it's done, and then you opt out after that. No, you will have to consent pretty much every time. And then the question, there are actually two questions within one. I believe that, again, it's a consumer's choice. You may not consent and then you don't share your data. We firmly believe that in many circumstances, it will be on the consumer's interest to do so, because by sharing your data, you get more players to compete for your business, and more players having access to the same type of data that allows them to underwrite credit and underwrite risk. So that it's beneficial for the consumer. But if the consumer or if the individual feels that the costs outweigh the benefits, you just don't consent. Very quickly, when I said phase 3, and it's an analogy to the Payment System Directive 2 of Europe. It's basically payment initiation, okay? Meaning that every authorized entity will be able to initiate payment, whether you have a bank account, whether, for instance, you have a transactional account with that entity or not. Imagine that you have your bank is X, let's say Barclays, but you may use an app from another bank or payment institution to initiate payment, and you can do through there. And you can do it with non-regulated entities as well, but they will have to have an agreement with a regulated entity. And the reason is, again, we're striking balances here. And our coercive, we're dealing with data, and obviously we have to envision and anticipate different types of behavior that are not conducive to competition. So we have to have coercive power to induce, which is in general is true, but obviously to induce good behavior. So that's why non-regulated entities will have to work through a regulated entity. And then there will obviously be decisions on the boundaries of the regulated ecosystem if this working through regulated entities produces some type of competitive disadvantage. And these are decisions that will be taken along the way. I think I don't think I have time for more questions without not giving the opportunity of Jean-Luc and Nina also reacting to questions and comments. Thanks.
Okay, great, you're great. Okay, Jean, Nina, maybe Jean has something to say.
I mean, I think that the questions were mainly directed to João, but I will just follow up about, again, the importance of it. I'm going to give a case example. We have struck a policy a couple of months ago, actually. There was a financial line designed to help companies to finance their payroll, and that was very important. I mean, it was even before the government offered to pay salary for those staying at home. And what happened, and the government put over 20 billion reais on it directly from our treasury. So what happened is, since the rules of the program were in which the company could only ask for the financial assistance from the institution that for which they already did their payroll payments, and that simply was not working fully. I mean, because there was no competition between different banks to offer the product to guarantee that the client would get it, because only one could have that information. So I mean, this case example that we had just in early April, late March, shows the importance of exchange of information between different institutions. Of course, there are concerns about data protection, but they are already being addressed. But I mean, the overall importance of it, it's going to be good for the consumer. And I think that João, it's really right on his point when he says that it's important not to have an open-end agreement, but at the same time, it has to be clear enough for the consumer, the benefits for him, specifically because in the end, it's about designing the best system, but a safe system. And so I guess this is it.
All right. Miss Nina?
Yeah, I think there is quite an overlap between the discussion about, the conflict between data protection on the one hand side and the protection of the financial area, specifically anti-money laundering and those things on the other hand. And any given system that you implement in the financial sector will need to balance those two things, right? And that's I think a very important goal to keep in mind.
All right. Well, we are reaching our final end, and I would like to thank you all for this very productive discussion. And maybe I would like to leave to finish this with sharing some ideas to the future, to the central bank and to the Secretary of Economy here monitoring, maybe to take care about a truly representation of stakeholders in this formation of this convention. Maybe we should go a little down to the ground, towards the grounds, and see or establish the requirements to be a representative, right? Whether these 6 persons or 6 institutions really represent those stakeholders. And maybe, João, it's only an idea in pencil, okay? So maybe central bank could consider inviting maybe the Secretary of Economy to stay there as well, to help you in building up this to the ground rule about representation, maybe. My idea as a citizen is to be represented there, not owning a bank, And I don't see, to finish, I don't see, of course, overlaps and tensions are always present when we enforce the law anyway, in anywhere. But I don't see actually a tension between data protection and the financial system and the results for consumer welfare, because ultimately consumer will allow beforehand the sharing of his or her data. So if the consumer is allowing he or she is presumable aware of the risks because he wants or she wants the benefits. So that's how I see my decision-making process, and that's how I see any reasonable person decision-making processes. Okay, so thank you all again. Any final remarks? If you don't have final remarks, we may finish.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation. It was a pleasure and privilege.
Thank you again also for an invitation. It's an extraordinary event, and thank you for the speakers for the amazing insights.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, RadicalxChange. Bye-bye.